So from our scripture lesson this morning, we find that Jesus, he visited the synagogue in Nazareth. And he was invited to preach while he was there. You know, I think that was natural, wasn't it? Because he was a homeboy, wasn't it? This was his home church that he grew up in. He had learned his spiritual ABCs in that synagogue. And a number of the people, I guess they could say, I used to be his teacher. He was such a nice boy. Smart, too. But you know, Jesus no longer lived in Nazareth. We find in the book of Matthew that as an adult, he made his home in Capernaum. So he was just visiting the place where he grew up. You know, at this time, we suspect that his father Joseph had passed. But I'm sure Mary would have been there, wouldn't she? Can't you imagine how proud Mary was? She must have just been so proud of Jesus, her firstborn son. It must have been wonderful for her to see him stand up and read the scriptures in the synagogue where she had brought him as a boy. She saw him unroll the scroll and to find his place. And then he read, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then Jesus sat down. You know, teachers always sat down in those days. And the people, they waited expectantly for him to speak. Now, I don't think sermons amounted to much in those days. They didn't have professional clergy. The preachers were usually men from the community who would comment on the scripture that was read that day. They were men who weren't trained professionally to speak publicly, so they would probably mostly recite what they learned as kids in the synagogue, as children. But these people, they had heard that Jesus was doing exciting things in Capernaum, so they waited expectantly for him to speak. And then Jesus said, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Doesn't sound like much of a sermon, does it? Today, the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. But those words, they got people's attention. And they wanted to know what Jesus meant. We go back and we look at this scripture from Isaiah. It had to do with blessings for the poor. And most of those people in that congregation, they were poor. The scripture had to do with blessings for people who were prisoners. And they were prisoners of the Roman soldiers who occupied their country. And this scripture had to do with letting the oppressed go free. And truly, my friends, they were oppressed. You know, the Roman emperor, he lived in great luxury, didn't he? Because ordinary people like these farmers and these shopkeepers from Nazareth, they had to pay such high taxes. And if they saw Roman soldiers walking down the road carrying a bag or carrying any type of load, that Roman soldier, he could say, "You, carry this." And they had to carry it. That is oppressed. So when Jesus said to them, he said, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing," these people perked up a little bit. They wanted to know what he meant. They wanted to know if he was planning to gather an army to expel the Romans. They wanted to know if he was going to give them their freedom. Freedom from an emperor who they never saw, but nevertheless extracted money from them at every turn. What they couldn't really appreciate was the fact that Jesus had an even grander vision here. He was planning to make life easier, not just for the people of Nazareth, but for the people of Israel, and for the people everywhere. God sent Jesus to bring good news to the poor. There isn't anyone who needs good news more than a poor person, is there? There aren't many people out there who really care for the poor. You know, poor people by definition, they have no money, do they? So they can't buy loyalty. They can't buy privilege. Poor people have little power. Poor people, they aren't very appealing, are they? They don't dress well. Sometimes they aren't clean. Sometimes they're drug addicts. Sometimes they're mentally ill. Sometimes we see them standing on the side of the road holding signs, don't we? Sometimes we see them sprawled out on sidewalks. But Jesus, he came to bring good news to the poor. And he calls us to bring good news to them as well. And Christians, we have been bringing good news to the poor for more than 20 centuries, haven't we? God sent Jesus to bring good news to the poor. And he also sends us to bring good news to the poor. And some of the people whom we meet are financially impoverished. Others, and I think this is the important one, are spiritually impoverished. We need to be giving as we have been blessed so that we can help those in need. You know, Jesus' disciples have done that throughout the centuries. In the book called I Was Just Wondering, author Philip Yancey, he noted that 3% of India's population counted themselves as Christians. But that small number of Christians, they provided over 18% of India's health care. Yancey wrote this book back in '89, and I'm sure some things have changed since then. But when India was desperate for health care, Christians reached out to help their neighbors. And we've done that in our own country, haven't we? We saw this phenomenon happen back when it was difficult to find funding for hospitals. Methodist churches and EUB, they pooled their resources and they built hospitals. Even today, there are over 50 hospitals and healthcare systems that are related to the United Methodist Church. We've all seen Methodist hospitals around the country, and we have Brethren hospitals as well. I know there's an evangelical community hospital in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And these hospitals and healthcare systems, they help over 32 million people a year. But you know, hospitals being funded by Christians, it's not really necessary anymore, is it? Because it's such a big business. Wall Street and cities want to do it for the tax purposes. It's big money, isn't it? So instead of appealing to Christians for fundings, hospitals are going to Wall Street and such. But Christians, we're still active all over the world to provide health care and education and sanitation and a host of other services that meet the needs of vulnerable people. And there are a few things that we here at Pikeside do as well to help vulnerable people in our own community. I'm going to read off just a couple, but if you think of one, shout it out. We support the Martinsburg Rescue Mission. We support the Abused Women's Shelter, which used to be Shenandoah, right? Martha, it's now called EPEC.
Eastern Panhandle Empowerment Center.
We got Kids Power Pack we support. Who else do we support out there to help our neighbors in need? CCAP. You might have got a couple others? Meals on Wheels, Bethany House. Watts. Dr. Watts at Tri-County, that's right. So God also sent Jesus to proclaim release to those who were prisoners or captives. The people to whom Jesus was preaching at the Nazareth synagogue, they were captives, weren't they? They were captives of Rome, and they knew that. But they were also captives of their own small vision and their appetites. And God sent Jesus to set them free. God also sent Jesus to give sight to the blind. And sometimes he did that by healing a blind man by restoring his sight. But he also came to give sight to those who were spiritually blind. The people to whom he was preaching in Nazareth, they were small people living in a small world. God sent Jesus to open their eyes to what might be, to what they might become, to what God had created them to be. And God also sent Jesus to set the oppressed free. Is it too much to say that only those who have experienced oppression can fully appreciate what it means to be free? Remember Archbishop Desmond Tutu? He grew up under apartheid in South Africa. And he's quoted here. He said, "There is nothing ever to equal being free. You can't put a money value on being free. To be able to wake up in a country and not have to say, do I have my pass on me? Am I allowed to go there? Can I take my children to that school?" Those are tough questions. And Bishop Tutu told of walking past a playground with his daughter many years ago and having to stop her from running onto the playground to play. And she would protest. "But there are other children there," she would say. He said in his interview, he said, "He got quite sick of having to say, yes, there are other children there, but they are not quite children like you. You know, God sent Jesus to set the oppressed free. And he calls us to do the same. We, my friends, we, his church, are his hands and feet to accomplish his purposes in this world. And it is his purpose that we bring good news to the poor, that we proclaim release to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, that we enable the oppressed to go free. It's a huge mission, isn't it, given the state of the world today? Seemingly an impossible mission. But God enables those whom he calls. God makes the impossible possible. God doesn't call any one of us to do the whole job, but he calls us to do our part. He has workers in every land and every face of the earth. With God's help, our small efforts can make a great difference, can't it? With God's help, our small efforts can make a great difference. So I would like to encourage you to spend some time this week considering how God might be calling you to help those in need. Pray about it. You know, your prayers don't have to be elaborate. You just have to close your eyes and ask, what can I do? How can I help? And this is the important part. Keep your eyes closed. Not while you're driving. Keep your eyes closed. And spend a moment or two in silence. And give God the chance to respond to you. You got to wait patiently, okay? And you got to listen. And do that each day for a week. If you will do that, I believe that God will surprise you with the wonderfully good news that your life can be worth living. That your life can be more than going through the motions. That you can be a blessing. And that in giving, you will receive a blessing. So pray about it, my friend. Pray about it each day this week. And let's see what God can and will do. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.